Welcome to another Wellness Wednesday. We are ready to begin. I want to do one today that we've actually talked about in the past. And that past event was feeling overwhelmed. I thought this was particularly good given, stuff leading up to the elections. I had a lot of people talking about feeling stressed and anxiety. And then, we had Halloween, and now we're heading into the holiday season, Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, a lot of different holidays are all coming up really soon. Um, and so with that in mind, I wanted to talk about feeling overwhelmed. I thought, and during the holiday season, sometimes that can happen a lot. And I wanted people to feel like they had some tools that would help them with that. So this quote felt particularly good. When feeling overwhelmed, you can't do everything now, but you can do anything you want, one thing at a time. So anything, one thing at a time. So when you start to feel overwhelmed, breaking it down, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Also getting unplugged, especially with all the stuff that's going on today and, all the things that are going on, getting unplugged, just taking a moment to get in touch with your senses and feel the warm air outside in November even, can really help with feeling overwhelmed. So what does overwhelmed feel like? For some of you that have experienced panic attacks, you know what feeling overwhelmed feels like to an extreme. For others, feeling overwhelmed can be parts of that, just not to the level of the panic attack. When you're overwhelmed, you can have trouble concentrating. You can have memory loss, like you just can't find the words or forget things that you were doing, or you start a sentence and forget to finish it. Don't worry, that doesn't necessarily mean there's some big medical issue. Sometimes it's involved with much smaller things. You can have increased heart rate, or you can have muscle spasms or contractions. You can have higher blood pressure. You can have shortness of breath. When you're feeling overwhelmed, you have that chronic stress and anxiety, your immune system actually can decrease in terms of its efficiency of keeping us well. You have increased levels of cortisol. And when we have constant and persistent stress, that's when our body starts to struggle keeping up with other things. So that's when we start to recognize other problems develop. You could have digestive issues. These are all possible symptoms of feeling overwhelmed. Other signs of feeling overwhelmed can be things like irrational thoughts, feeling frozen, pessimism, or even sarcasm can be in there. I know some of us are sarcastic naturally. I am. That said, if you notice that all you're ever is in this negative Nancy kind of mode, you might want to check in and see if you're doing enough self-care. Disproportionate reactions. I've definitely been there where I felt overwhelmed on any given day, and my daughter is mad because her toast is over toasted, not burnt, mind you, over toasted. It's slightly darker brown than she wants her toast to be. Ridiculous, I know, and definitely a first world problem. And I completely overreacted. I got so upset with her because I thought it was just ridiculous. Anyway, I recognized in that moment I was feeling a little overwhelmed about everything that had nothing to do with the toast. Other people can withdraw. So they might stop hanging out with friends or stop calling people or stop texting. You can feel both cognitive and physical fatigue when you're feeling overwhelmed. And mood shift quickly, which can go back to the disproportionate reactions. So related to that, what are some reasons for feeling overwhelmed? Well, we we all have the reasons, right? And I just mentioned a few that are coming up. We have the holidays coming up, which comes along with a lot of added pressure to entertain family or to travel to family or to have to deal with family that we normally don't want to deal with or other people. We have the stressors financially of putting on a big meal or buying presents for holidays or again, traveling. Um, and that's all on top of the stuff that's always going on. Parenting, being a spouse, making ends meet, stressful work environment, maybe trouble with friendships, maybe you have health concerns, or you had a traumatic experience that keeps getting triggered. Um, Major life changes. I talk about this with patients all the time when they're really feeling overwhelmed and stressed. They're really being hard on themselves. And I remind them that they had recently gone through a lot of major life changes. So what would that look like? Moving, if you have to move, marriage, divorce, even though marriage is happy, it's a big life change. Marriage, divorce, moving in with someone dying or getting a fatal illness, uh, changing jobs. Those are all major life changes. For younger folks, it could be changing schools, right? Either graduating and moving on to another one or having to change schools because of a move or for other reasons. All these are kind of big, major changes and can cause or add to that feeling of being overwhelmed. So let's start with some ways we can deal with that. One of the first ways you can work on reducing the feeling of being overwhelmed, and you can practice this at any time, anywhere, you can practice some mindfulness and some breathing techniques. So as you see the box moving, I'll get to that in a second. That's our box breathing technique. First, I want to talk about some mindfulness exercises. One that I absolutely love in terms of a grounding technique is something I call the 5 4 3 2 1. You have a moment. I just want you to take a breath. Okay. Now I want you to, and if we were doing this in person, you would say it out loud. And because we're on Zoom, but you are muted, you can all do this out loud because it adds to the attention you're putting towards the activity. I want you to say out loud in detail 5 things, 5 items that you can see in your environment. So for me, I see the dot moving around in a square. I see the gauge that's very colorful. I see my uh, cup of tea. I can see Bentley, the therapy dog, laying in front of the door, snoring. Very safe. Uh, and I can see the computer screen from which you are seeing. 4 things that you can hear. I can hear Bentley snoring. I can hear the air conditioner unit. Yes, the air conditioning is on in November. I can hear people walking outside my door. I can hear the noise canceling machine that I have outside the door. 3, 3 things you can feel. This can be temperature or tactile. So I can feel my sweater on my skin. I can feel the cool air coming from the vent. And I can feel the warmth from the cup of tea that I have. 2 things, 2 things that you can smell. I can smell the tea, which smells absolutely wonderful. And maybe not so wonderful, I can smell Bentley because she desperately needs a bath. And then one thing you can taste. I can taste the spiciness of the chai tea. So there you go. There are several things that we just walked through. That was the 5 4 3 2 1. It helps you connect to your senses and to your environment. When we do that, the reason the brain gets overwhelmed is it's taking past data, and that past data is informing your brain thinking that you're in a dangerous situation or something that's going to be stressful or bad, right? So you have to remind your brain you're not in that moment. You're not in that past event that was hurtful or harmful in some way. So going to your senses is bringing you back to the now, back to the moment. That's what mindfulness is all about. And that's what that exercise does. You can also do something similar with a lifesaver where you take, I like the peppermint ones because they're particularly spicy and they really get the sense of taste going and also the tactile sensation inside your mouth because lifesavers have the letters. They have lots of different aspects that you can feel that is good. So you can bring lifesavers with you. You can use those no matter where you are. Ice on the back of the neck or on your wrists can really help. Eucalyptus or another very strong scent. So a lot of people say lavender. I don't think lavender is a strong enough scent to really like jolt you back to the now. Eucalyptus or peppermint are very, very strong. The other one that sometimes can work for people is the orange, the smell of orange. Saunas or cold showers, opposite ends of the spectrum, they can both be really helpful in reducing feeling overwhelmed. So, other things, creating boundaries. Creating boundaries. So that means learning how to say no or telling people, yes, I can help you, but only between these hours. As a therapist, I have to set a lot of boundaries, right? I would I would love to help people all evening or all weekend, but I have a family to take care of too, right? So I have to prioritize my family and set boundaries around my work hours and then see people when I can, right? And if I break that boundary, then what's going to happen is I'm going to become stressed and that's going to cause issues. Hi, everybody. I had to take a little bit of a break. We had some stuff going on at the medical center that needed attention. Clearly, it didn't affect Bentley's sleeping, so good for that. Okay, let's go back to boundaries. There were some boundaries that we had to deal with today at the medical center. Anyway, so setting boundaries can help reduce the feeling of being overwhelmed. Um, it's really important that you try to set them up when you're not overwhelmed, because then it's easier to enforce the boundaries when this comes up. Um, and it reduces that feeling of feelings getting hurt or people feeling, put out or whatever when you set up boundaries suddenly. Um, Self-compassion. We all get overwhelmed. I have been in the field of psychology for 20, almost 30 years. Okay. I still get overwhelmed. I don't do it all right. I make mistakes and do the wrong things. And, it happens to all of us. It happens to people that know what's going on and study this stuff, and it happens to people that don't. So, self-compassion and just understanding that, you know what, if something happened, it wasn't the best, just try to do the next right thing or the next thing that is going towards a direction that you want to go towards. Sometimes all that means is stopping, looking at our little square here and breathing in, holding, breathing out, holding, breathing in, holding. Just that, right? Just do that for a couple seconds. Reminding yourself that you are worthy of love and that you too shall get through this. Support network's really important. Having more than one person. And I say that because people can get compassion fatigue. So make sure you have a few people on a list that you can call, that they don't need to be expert advisors. They just need to be someone that you know will listen to you. Therapy, of course, I'm going to say that, right? That's what I do. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is filling your life meter. So filling your life meter means doing things that recharge your battery. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's a really important one too. And these can all help you reduce the feelings of being overwhelmed. So I feel like we already talked about this. Reasons for being overwhelmed. Um, this one is more related to kids feeling overwhelmed. We talked about how, well, adults can feel overwhelmed. Well, kids get overwhelmed too. And certainly during the holidays, good holidays can cause kids to feel overwhelmed. I see it in elementary school kids, especially around this time of year. They have Halloween and they have Halloween parties and Halloween parades and trunk or treats and all this stuff. And all this stuff is going on. And it's kind of the ends of sports seasons and the beginning of new seasons. And there's a lot going on. And kids can definitely get overwhelmed. So they might get overwhelmed because they're not getting enough sleep, right? There's a lot of things going on in the evening that can make them feel overwhelmed. They can have experienced or witnessed a traumatic event. And remember, trauma isn't always big T. That's the word we use in our field. Big T means, when we think about like folks that go to war and they see someone, get shot or something really traumatic, like that. It can be, or someone that is abused. That's big T trauma, right? Little T trauma is still traumatic. Something that can be traumatic to a kid is having a kid in the classroom that makes fun of them. And even if it's just, word making fun, like that can be traumatic, or being embarrassed in front of a class because they slipped and fell, or they, you know, passed gas in the middle of class and everyone hurt. I mean, that can be traumatic, temporary, but it can still feel traumatic. There can be lots of things that can cause trauma to people, especially depending on what I always say, how much bandwidth they have. So when we have more bandwidth, right, when we're more recharged, when we're more um, our energy meter is more full, things will feel less traumatic and then won't stick with us as long. Change for kids, change. And so going back to those life changes, changing schools, changing classes, changing teachers, changing friend groups, which happens a lot, right? Changing sports teams, all can feel traumatic. Bereavement, when people either move away, they pass away, whatever the case may be, breaking up with a boyfriend or girlfriend, all of those things can cause it. Being overcommitted, I definitely feel this one. I see it a lot with my kids' age groups where they're on multiple sports teams, and it's the parents are trying to get them everywhere. I also fall into this category with my kids because they haven't honed in on one sport that they love or not, or haven't decided they don't like one. So as a parent, I want them to do it all, but then I also have to remember that they're kids and they need time to be bored and have nothing to do, and I don't have to constantly keep them busy. Which goes to the next one, which is feeling controlled by others. I get a lot of adolescents in my office that when I talk about the locus of control and what's within their control, and they say, well, it's my behavior, and we go through that, and then we talk about like they struggle too because in their situation, there is some level of where they feel like they're being controlled by their parents or their teachers or their coaches, and that can feel really hard. And so helping talk to them about that and kind of talking about like, hey, we have rules, mutual rules of like respect and love and things like that. And ultimately, it's your decision to be respectful or not. And you have to make the right decision. So, like talking about that and helping, and anywhere you can, where you can give kids a choice, maybe they have, they're part of an important drama group that has a play coming up in like a couple weeks, right? They also have sports and they're conflicting. You can give them the choice and kind of help them work through the choice. Like, hey, well, you have this play coming up in a couple weeks. That sounds pretty important. We're the sports team, you're just getting started. You don't have any games for several weeks. So whatever the case may be, helping them walk through and helping them feel like they do have some decisions and that they do have some control will be really helpful to reducing that feeling overwhelmed. Underlying medical conditions, kids with ADD or ADHD often are kids that feel overwhelmed. Um, and that can be coupled with anxiety or depression a lot. Um, Kids that struggle with, identity and are trying to figure out who they are, and maybe who they are doesn't fit in with the norm of their school or their friend group, that can feel really overwhelming. And that goes to social pressure. So these are all reasons kids can feel overwhelmed. So what might that manifest or look like? Well, it might look like kids being super irritable and lashing out and things that really, might not. Kids are going to all have different signs and symptoms of feeling overwhelmed. And I won't go through every single one. You can read all these, but you want to recognize that, a lot of these. So with kids, sometimes a lot of, because they might have the words to express they're overwhelmed, it might manifest in ways like the irritability, or a lot of times I see GI issues or getting like stomach aches. Um, Especially younger kids, they'll feel like they have a lot of stomach aches or headaches. So, obviously ruling out medical things first to make, and then if it still persists, then that's when you want to maybe start exploring like and thinking about the lifestyle and what's been going on in your child's life, and digging in and remembering, ask questions and just remember to listen. Feeling heard is so much a part of what kids need. And sometimes, as you and I both know, just when we get to feel we're heard, then we're able to kind of blow up that steam and it can feel a little bit better. Um, Kids can often, when they're feeling overwhelmed, have trouble concentrating. So, I can see this a lot where if kids are constantly feeling overwhelmed and they're having trouble concentrating, and then parents are getting frustrated with them. They think they're either being lazy or maybe they have a another condition. There are all these different things. Look for change, basically change in behavior in any way, change in eating, sleeping, people they hang out with, stop hanging out with, um, not finishing tasks, all those things. If that changes, that's really when you want to kind of dive a little bit deeper. So again, how do we reduce these feelings of being overwhelmed with kids? All the same stuff we talked about with adults. And so mindfulness, exercise, all the ones I pointed out earlier are all valid and can be used with kids. Often I hear school counselors talking about cupcake breathing or birthday breathing, where they're blowing out the candles so they breathe in and they blow out the candles. That's fine if that works for younger kids because that helps them to feel it. That can be good. There's um, creating boundaries, asking your kids and helping them create boundaries by things like turning off electronics, having, you as a parent setting boundaries around screen time, social media, um, time with friends, because sometimes kids don't want to be the one to say, "Oh, I need to go home." I know I was this teenager. I loved the fact that my parents were strict because then I could be like, "Oh, I have to go home because my parents want me to go home." It was way easier than having to say, like, "I want to go home because I'm done hanging out with you people." So don't feel bad about setting boundaries as a parent. Recognize that sometimes they need that. So also remember with kids, they, especially, in adolescence, they have this flood of hormones. They're going to feel engrossed in things and then zone out, and they're going to feel lots of fatigue and lots of things going on that are going to feel confusing and frustrating. So just making sure they reduce screen time, which they think that's zoning out, but it's still engaging your brain. It's not giving the brain a break. So trying to get away from that, get them outside. This picture, get them outside and in nature, get them exercising, go for a walk in the woods or a walk in a park. Give them really small, manageable tasks. So maybe it's the weekend, and I know on Saturday mornings we have chore morning, as long as there aren't sports, and each kid gets a list. And I have to remind myself, because I always make a giant list for me, that I make their list shorter. And the younger they are, you might have to help them with the list. That's going to make them feel successful. So don't feel like you're enabling them to not do the chore just because you're helping them. Um, Other things that can be really helpful for kids to help them feel less overwhelmed is actually decluttering. So having organization in the home, in their room, having places where things go, whether it's bins or boxes, cabinets, drawers, whatever, labeling those cabinets or drawers. I know for my daughter's room, I actually labeled the drawers so she knows where long sleeve shirts go versus short sleeve, because she would forget and then she would just start putting them around. But now she has it labeled. It's easier and it's just a sticker. I can peel it off if I want. Um, Volunteering. This is something that's great. I say this all the time. If you've ever listened to my Wellness Wednesdays, I always talk about volunteering. It doesn't have to be huge. It can be, cleaning up the environment by picking up trash in the neighborhood, or it can be going to your local SPCA and helping walk the dogs there. It can be going to your local church and helping collect canned goods or helping the local pastor or priest. It doesn't matter. Going next door and helping a neighbor do something that's hard for them, all of that is helpful. When you help someone else, you're helping yourself because you are giving yourself feel-good chemicals. Also, when kids are struggling with something, if they do share something, help them problem solve how to get through it. Ask them open-ended questions. So if they're saying, "Oh, like I'm fighting with my best friend so and so." Oh, okay. Well, what's the fight about? I don't want to talk about it. Okay, well, how do you feel about the fight, right? So you can change the question to try and get to something they do want to talk about. Because if they bring it up at all, they might want to talk about it. And if sometimes self-disclosure can help. Like I've had fights with my friends before too, and it feels really hurtful. And kind of walking them through that, trying to put it in their mindset. Um, so those are ways you can help kids, obviously, like anything that is relaxing, meditation. You can meditate with your kids, and that can be fun. And there are even like kid version meditations out there. I'm blanking on the names of them, but there are definitely ones out there that you can use. There are definitely ones you can find on YouTube. Okay, so this activity I think is a great one for adults and kids, and I use it a lot. This is something when you want to look at your needs versus your wants and nevers. Now, nevers doesn't mean they never happen. What it means is when you do that thing, it feels exhausting. So for an introvert, that might mean they have to give a public speech or they have to go into a big group party. For an introvert, that's going to be overwhelming and exhausting. So what I tell people is once they're able to fill out needs, so needs are the things that you have to do every day to feel like you're recharging your battery. So for most people, getting 8 hours of sleep. I'm going to say for all people, right? As humans, we need 8 hours of sleep. We need exercise. We need intentional movement. We need healthy, nutritional food. Okay. And we do need some social interaction, right? We are not meant to be solitary animals. So those things are needs across the board. We need safety, right? So we know we need all those things. So how do we can start there. Then beyond that, what are other things for you that are a need? It might be you need to make art every day, or at least every a couple of days a week, because that just fills up your cup. It charges your battery. It might be I have to play with my dog because my dog just makes me laugh, or whatever it is. There are going to be things on there that, and you'll know it's a need because if you don't get it for a few days, or if it's a weekly thing, you don't get it for a few weeks, you get irritable, and all those symptoms of the overwhelmed come up. If you have things like that, they are a need. The nevers, like I said, they're the things that drain your battery. It doesn't mean you never do them. It might be you might have a particular coworker that is extremely draining, but you have to work with the person, right? Wants are things you really like, but they may not drain you. You want them, but it might not give you energy or take energy away. For me, that's vacations because it really depends on the vacation. Sometimes they're exhausting, sometimes they're helpful. Um, so filling this out, doing your own, and then filling it out with your kids can be really helpful because then they will have a list. And I would put it up somewhere, like tape it to their wall or their mirror and a mirror in a bathroom and put it in something. That will be really helpful to them because they will then be able to look at things. So, and then you can help them with this and be like, hey, I know you've got to go do this thing that's really draining. And so make sure before you do that, you do something on your needs list and kind of ask your kids like to make sure that they do something on the needs list every day. And you've got to do something on your needs list too, and you can keep each other accountable. Questions you can use when you're dealing with trying to figure out if someone's overwhelmed or for yourself. Can you identify the source of stress? Like what's causing you to feel overwhelmed? And it might be multiple things. Okay. And once you know what it is, ask yourself, can you control that source? So back to the needs, wants, nevers. There are things on your nevers list that you can't control and you can't avoid. Well, then what you can control is how you manage your energy before and after that thing, right? Can you identify tasks? So if you're feeling overwhelmed because you have a lot of things to do in very little time, can you identify tasks that can be quick wins, right? Call that low hanging fruit, or the things that you can get quickly that will make you feel better, that give you a little bit of motivation to keep going. And are there other things on the list that are time sensitive? Like if I don't get this done by tomorrow, then it's going to be late and that's going to have a host of consequences. List 3 people that can help support you. Have that list, right? Make calendar time for the things that you need to get done. And then finally, at the end of every day, what brought you joy? What are you grateful for? What is something that went well in that day? When we feel overwhelmed, we have to remember that the whole day isn't bad. There have been things that haven't gone my way in the last couple of days, and I always have to remind myself, okay, well, this didn't go my way, but you know what? This happened, and that was pretty cool. So I hope this is helpful with, like I said, with holidays coming up, most of us will find times where we're feeling overwhelmed. Try this. Remember to have compassion for yourself, have compassion for others. Take a deep breath and only take one small step at a time to get towards your goal. Okay. Have a great Wednesday. Thanks for joining me as always. And again, if you have things you want to talk about, please, by all means, reach out on Facebook and suggest. I will see you next week.